Hello, this is Ian Miller with The Coffee Shop, and this is a brief overview of creatR's interface and usage. Consider it sort of a brief introductory tutorial on how to use creatR. This is sort of a supplement to the in-app help. I suggest you read that first, and then watch this video in its entirety before you start attempting to do anything with creatR. Also, I've split this video up into a number of segments, and you can click here on the screen which one you'd like to jump to, and during any point in the video you can click the top of the screen if you want to come back to this page. But I would still strongly advise you to watch this straight through before you start playing with creatR if you haven't used it before, because it will make the interface make a lot more sense. creatR's main control panel down here is this bottom bar, and it's split up into sections here. So this far left section is the adding section, let you add a number of objects. This sort of middle-ish section is sort of miscellaneous stuff. This section here is devoted to the removal of the objects that you've added, and this far right section has to do with manipulation of the interface and animation. Finally, this sort of bar thing that sticks out, this tab up here, tap it, and this control panel will pop up that lets you adjust all the characteristics of a specific shape in more detail, more specifically. But we'll get into more of that later. So let's break these interface elements down even more. This plus, with sort of a circle in it, is to add a circle. This plus with a square in it is, guess what? It's to add a rectangle. This sort of double square isn't quite as obvious. It's to duplicate a shape. This plus with a sort of point and a circle around that point is to add a pin, and there's a number of different types of pin. We'll cover that later. And this farthest right button in this section is to add a rod. These two buttons are pretty self-explanatory. There's sort of two X buttons here. The left one is to delete any constraint that you want, any joint, and the right one is to delete any shape. This far right section has this pretty self-explanatory, except for this fast, accurate slider. In this slide, if the slider is set more toward fast, the animation will move more quickly, but you might get some really interesting behavior that doesn't make any sense. Like you might get some shapes falling through other shapes if they're going at a very quick speed. And if you set it on accurate, it's going to look like everything's moving in slow motion, but physics-wise, you're going to get a lot less anomalies. Moving around your sort of canvas here, the canvas is as big as you want it to be. Use two fingers to sort of slide around. I've put this shape here so you can really actually sort of tell what's going on here. And these buttons down here let you zoom in and zoom out. creatR really only has two different types of shapes. And with these two primitive types, you can create all sorts of shapes. And they are circles and rectangles. But you can join these circles and rectangles together to create virtually an infinite number of shapes. So adding is pretty simple. You just tap whatever kind of shape you want on these plus buttons. So I'm going to add a circle, and then just tap on the screen where you want that circle to be. Do the same with a rectangle. Now you'll notice that when you tap here, right below these buttons here, you're going to get this little switch, and it says static, and then there's this switch. So switching that switch before you tap is going to give you a shape with the dotted line, dotted border. That means it's static. So if I play this here, you'll notice that that shape is staying still and all the other shapes are being affected by gravity. It's because that shape is a so-called static shape. And the same thing happens with a rectangle. And so to move a shape, you tap the shape, that selects it, the border gets bolded, and then you can just drag around. Move your shape around to your heart's content. You can do this with any shape, even static shapes, but obviously. So now if we move them together, you can notice that these shapes have started to interact. To duplicate a shape, you're going to tap this sort of double shape button. So select the shape you want to duplicate, tap it, and you've duplicated that shape. Select it, tap the duplicate button, tap where you want the duplicated shape to be. Well, obviously duplication isn't very helpful if you're not able to make the shapes any different from their defaults. So to do that, the creatR uses gesture controls. So you're going to tap the shape and then pinch to change the length, and then vertically pinch to change the height. So now we have this like huge rectangle. And this exactly the same thing works with circles, except that circles, obviously, it doesn't really matter which way you pinch because they only have one dimension. These circles cannot become ovals. Now, you can also rotate shapes. That doesn't really matter with a circle, but you can rotate them. 2 fingers, sort of make this rotatey gesture thing. It can be a little bit hard to get the hang of how to make this gesture work, but it's really not that difficult once you figure it out. Now, to delete shapes, before we do that, let's see. So now duplication here. Yes, see, now it's a lot more obvious that you're duplicating that shape instead of just creating another default one. Another interesting thing to note here is that when you switch this static switch button, all the shapes that you add that aren't duplications are going to be static until you switch it back, and then they will cease being static. Now, you'll be noticing here that I've been deleting shapes. And to do that, so let's add a quick shape here to delete. Big so it's more obvious. So, tap this delete shape button. It's not the one on the left, it's the one on the right. Tap it, and then tap the shape, and it'll go away. You can also, if you want to delete all the shapes, press this clear shapes button, which does exactly what you would think it would. So, the next thing here is, what if you want to have a specific angle? Or you want to have, pretty much a specific anything. You want this specific angle, you want a specific length, because you're just a perfectionist like that. So we can to do that, we can use this precision controls button. So, I've been trying to get this thing to line up at exactly 10 degrees, and I'm just getting really irritated. So over on this precision controls button, we have a number of options here. From the top, friction, mass, those two can only be controlled from this panel. X and Y position, those are on the Cartesian coordinate system. Width, height, and angle. So if I want exactly 10 degrees, I can just tap there, 10, hit return. And then make sure you press the set button. And that sort of activates, sets, whatever, your changes. If you don't do that, then no changes are going to occur. Now, you can do that, all these X, Y positions, width, height, angle, those are pretty self-explanatory. Friction and mass are what you would think they would mean the same thing. Mass is really the same thing as weight in this particular case. Even though physics professors would get mad at me if I said that, but it's for purposes of this application, it's the same thing. So items with the same mass are going to fall at the same rate, but if I made a teeter-totter or something, obviously the more massive one would fall. So you can do a number of interesting things with those. They're not in any particular unit, but obviously the higher the friction, the more friction there is. And these sliders are sort of a general idea, so I can just change these. But they're not going to, they sort of are within a feasible range if you want to make something that's just absolutely ridiculous, you can tap right in within that box and set like 1 million or something. But you're going to get some really interesting, the physics engine's probably going to not work so great if you do that. So we can make all these sort of shapes. We can make like this playground of shape hood here. But if we don't have any constraints or joints, we can't really do anything. I mean, we can make shapes fall and hit stuff, but I mean, that's about it. So if we want to actually join items together to create more deep behavior, there's 2 buttons to allow us to do that. These two most right buttons on your adding panel thing here are rod and pins, and pins are more complicated, so we're going to start out with rods. So to make a rod, you're going to tap the Add Rod button, tap the first point you want, slide, go to the second one you want, release, and you'll get this sort of purplish rod thing. So now if we play, you'll notice that we have a rod, and the rod is not going to collide with anything. It's just going to hold these 2 points on these 2 objects the same distance apart. So you can see a lot of opportunities for really interesting designs here. Now if I want to delete the rod, I can't really, you tap this delete constraints button, it's this F, so the X on the left, and then tap this sort of ball thing in the middle. If I can. There. If you have trouble tapping something, zoom in and it will become easy. I'm kind of at the border of level where it's actually easy to tap that. So the next kind of shape is sort of about 5 different kinds of constraints. Did I say shape? Constraint. And these kinds of constraints require 2 overlapping shapes. If they're not overlapping, you'll get this error up here that it needs a joint between 2 shapes. So there's 3 kinds here. So when you tap this button, you're going to get this sort of toggle thing. There's a swivel, a rivet, and a motor. And if you tap not rotor, you're going to get this slider thing that says speed. So let's start out with swivel. It's the simplest. So to add a swivel, you just tap the button, select swivel, tap where you want the swivel to be. And let's do a quick demo here of how this is going to work. So it acts like a swivel between those 2 joints. That's pretty self-explanatory. The next one is a rivet. A rivet is just like a swivel, except it's going to keep the 2 angles. It's basically going to make a single shape out of those 2. So they're not going to be able to rotate independently. Let me do an example. So you can see they're actually sort of bound together. They're not going. No rotation is going to be allowed. And to delete both of these types, you're going to tap this sort of X bar button and then just tap the joint. Now the most complicated of these is the motor. The motor is a motor, and it's going to cause, so it's like a swivel, but it's motorized. And motors, this sort of slider thing has to do with how sweet it is. If you're over on this side, it's going to move in the opposite direction. See, notice that this piece is now moving in the opposite direction. And if you put it over this, how far it is over in that direction has to do with how fast it's going to go. So now it's going to go like crazy fast. Motors do not really have a set direction they're going to go. To the right of the middle is not always going to be clockwise. To the left isn't always going to be counterclockwise. And this has to do with a number of things with physics engine and interactions between shapes. But the long and short of it is that you add your motor, and if it's not going in the right direction, remove it, slide the slider to the opposite side, and presto, you should be good to go. One last thing. To remove constraints, you can remove them in the manner that I've been showing them to you before. like really cool Batman swing thing. Or you can just tap this clear constraints button and all of them will go away. So let's add those back in because we want them for the next demonstration. And yes, you can also attach Rivet. You can attach joints between any two shapes, except motors. You can't really attach a motor between two static shapes because it'll let you, but it won't do anything. So we made this wonderful creation that's really, and we would like to save it for future reference. So you're going to tap the Save Load button. Go to Open Slave Slot. If you don't have anything in your, haven't saved anything before, this is all going to be empty and you're just going to have this open save slot. Tap here, name it like, I don't know, useless design. Tap save. So now I can clear these shapes, go to useless design, hit load, and voila, we have useless design. You can also delete any designs you want, because useless design is pretty useless. We can delete it from the save list, and now you'll notice it's not there. So the last thing that we're going to do here is a kind of a fairly brief demonstration of utilizing all of the various techniques I've outlined over the course of this video to create, in this case, sort of a zig lift, which is like those X-beam lifts that, yeah, lift stuff. And it's interesting, fairly easy to make, and also fairly quick. So and uses all of the various techniques that I've outlined over the course of this video. So it should be useful, I hope. I also suggest for this that you might even want to follow along with this, or at least watch this and then attempt to make this, because it's a good indication of whether you know your way around creatR. So, start out with, we're going to add some static shapes. So we're going to add one here. Press the add button, remember, make sure your static switch is on. Then we're going to make these a bit wider. See why later. And now I'm going to go through and add this little piston. You want to make sure that this is about the same height as these two. It doesn't really matter if it overlaps a bit. It'll be good. And this is now capable of sliding between those two. So we've created this sort of piston, I guess, would be a good example. Make a little circle here, a bit larger. I like to make all my static shapes, then I like to, after that I make all of my dynamic shapes, and then I add all my joints. But you don't have to do it that way. So now I'm going to add a rectangle here. Remember, pinch to change its size. And in this case, I want a specific angle. So I'm going to go set this angle here to 25. Now remember, select the one you want to duplicate, tap the duplicate button, tap you want where the button duplicated item to be. But we want this to make this zig lift, we want it to be negative 25. So there's the first X formed. And now, select one of them, duplicate. Select the other one. See, you don't duplicate. So now we're ready, we've got our basic outline here. We just need to add all of our connections. There's a lot of swivels in this, so I'm just going to go ahead and add all of them. Tap your swivel button, make sure that swivel is selected on this. Swivels show up as red dots to make sure that they are indeed swivels. And then I'm going to add a motor. Speed doesn't really matter, but don't make it like ultra fast and don't make it ultra slow. Sort of intermediate on this wheel. And now we just need a drive. So we're going to go ahead and put in this drive. let's play this. So now we have a zig left, and this is being a bit jerky. It's not working very well. I can help minimize that by tapping this and setting my friction up here to 0. That'll make the action a bit smoother, because this won't be sliding as well. So I hope this tutorial has been helpful in helping you understand creatR, and go forth and create.